Primitive, dirty, brutal. That's how most people today describe medieval survival. They picture peasants freezing in mud huts, burning manure, wrapping themselves in rags, barely making it through the night. But reality, it was far more clever and far more ruthless. When firewood ran out, when snow sealed the doors, when winter stretched into May, it wasn't comfort that saved them. It was these so-called desperate tricks. Not just warmth, but systems, strategies, survival blueprints. They had no heaters, no rescue plans, no modern insulation, just memory, instinct, and whatever the earth, the animals, or the ashes could offer. You call it desperation. They called it heat. And for one shepherd alone in the mountains with no help coming, those brutal tricks weren't history. They were his only chance. And one of these tricks still used today by off-grid preppers and mountain guides. Toma lived alone high in the Pyrenees. No neighbors, no roads, just windstone and silence. The cold came early that year. By the first week of November, the creek had frozen solid. Firewood was scarce, and the only thing thinner than the smoke from his chimney was hope. He wasn't a warrior, not a monk, not a lord, just a shepherd, thin, tired, and stubborn. And when the storms rolled in, when the snow piled higher than the fence posts, there was no one coming to help. No carts, no letters, no rescue. If he wanted to stay warm, he'd have to remember how. Not from books, not from machines, but from the old ways passed down in sweat, in dirt, in whispers beside dying fires. This is the story of how he survived 7 brutal tricks one cold night, and no one but himself. By the time Toma opened his eyes, the sky was still black. His breath hung in the air silver and still. The fire had long died out, and his legs, stiff, numb, almost wooden, ached with cold. He didn't reach for firewood. There wasn't any. Instead, he pulled aside the ash pit. Beneath the cold gray crust, the layer below still held warmth, soft and slow, like breath trapped in soil. He scooped handfuls of it into an old cloth and pressed it around his feet. Then his thighs, then wrapped his hands like gloves made of dust. The warmth wasn't sharp like flame. It didn't sting or crackle, but it stayed low, even, quiet. It reminded him of his mother. She used to pack warm ash into wool socks on bitter nights, whispering that fire leaves but ash remembers. That memory had followed him all the way to this frozen hut on the edge of nowhere. In the modern world, warmth comes at a switch. You flick the heat on. You never ask where it comes from or how long it will last. But here, nothing comes easy. You learn to harvest even what the fire leaves behind. Cold ash doesn't look like much, but it insulates like snow. It wraps the body without burning it. And when there's nothing left to burn, it might be the only warmth you get. Toma didn't smile. He didn't curse. He just sat still as the stone hands wrapped in ash eyes blinking slowly in the dark. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't clean, but it worked. And sometimes survival doesn't ask for beauty, just memory. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the edge of the sky had started to pale, a faint bruise of light stretching across the mountains. Toma stood by the hearth, his breath soft against the stone wall, waiting for the first flicker of flame to catch. He wasn't building a fire for warmth. Not this time. He just needed to heat a stone. A flat, rounded one about the size of a goat's head pulled from the stack near the door. He placed it in the coals, buried it, and let it soak. 15 minutes later, he pulled it out with tongs, careful, slow, and slid it beneath the hay-stuffed bench he used for meals. Then he sat down, easing himself onto it, like settling into a warm memory. The heat moved up from beneath. Not aggressive, not dangerous, just steady. It spread through his thighs, his spine, and into the ache of another long night gone. His grandfather had taught him that trick. Don't waste fire warming the air, he used to say. Warm what touches your bones. And in that moment, Toma understood it again. You don't need to heat the whole room, just the part where you are. Modern people heat their homes like castles. Blast the air, seal the windows, fight the cold with machines that hum behind walls. But here, there were no thermostats, no backup power, just a stone, some coals, and the memory of how to use them. It didn't look like much. A man on a bench, a warm rock under his legs, but it was enough. And as the steam rose from his cloak and the pain in his back began to fade, Toma felt something he hadn't felt all night. Not comfort, but control. By late morning, the frost on Toma's roof had melted into little rivulets, slipping down the thatch like quiet fingers. But the chill inside his hut still clung to the air, slow to leave, like smoke without fire. He stepped outside, pulled the hood over his head, and ran a hand along the southern wall. Rough stone, darkened by age, warmed by the sun. That wall had no wires, no pipes, no insulation hidden inside, and yet it did more than most heaters he'd seen in the towns. Toma didn't build it by accident. His grandfather once told him, "The sun is free, just don't waste where it hits." So when they rebuilt the hut after the avalanche, they placed the widest wall to face south, stacked the stones with care, layered dark mud over the outer surface, smoothed it, sealed it, and left it to the light. By midday, you could press your palm to it and feel the sun from hours before. That warmth soaked in all day, then bled back out as the sky dimmed. It wasn't hot, but it was steady. Modern homes use double glazing solar panels, radiant floors. All smart, all good, but sometimes a silent wall placed right, built right, does the job just fine. Toma never thought of it as technology. It was just memory in stone. An old habit passed through calloused hands, proof that even without fire, without power, you could still borrow heat from the sky itself. But even that wasn't the cleverest thing he used. That came later, when the cold got personal. By late afternoon, the warmth from the wall was already fading. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the floor. Toma knew what was coming. That deep, bone-slow chill that crept in after sunset. Not fast, but relentless. He didn't wait for the cold to reach him. Instead, he knelt at the far end of the hut near the back wall, where the wind didn't reach. With a flat spade and sore hands, he started digging. Not deep, just enough for his body. A shallow pit 2 feet wide, 4 feet long, lined with straw he'd saved from the loft. He packed it thick at the bottom, a layer to separate him from the frozen ground, then laid a heavy wool blanket over the top, not above him, but beneath. Above the pit, he strung a sagging piece of cloth from one beam to another, a low ceiling barely high enough to move under. A poor man's tent, a second skin against the cold. He'd done this before, years ago when the snows came early and the hearth ran cold. His father had shown him. Sleep low, he'd said, and the earth will hold you like a cradle. Not a bed, a burrow, a cocoon of dirt, hay, and wool. Modern homes would never allow it. Too primitive, too dirty. But Toma wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to stay alive, and no mattress ever held heat like packed straw underfoot and a roof just inches from your nose. Outside, the wind howled, but inside that pit, the world narrowed. The draft disappeared. His breath warmed the air around him, and for once he didn't shiver. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Because warmth doesn't come from things. It comes from knowing where to dig, what to keep, and how not to forget. The sun had barely dipped below the ridge, but the chill was already crawling in from the corners of the hut. Toma stood outside, staring at the horizon, where the last scraps of light clung to the peaks like torn silk. Evening wasn't the worst. It was the wet that came with it, the creeping damp that soaked into wool, into bones, into sleep. He moved quickly, not in a panic, just with purpose. The goats were penned, the tools were hung, and now it was time to seal himself in. He reached for a folded cloth tucked behind the door, heavy linen layered with an old beeswax coating, cracked in places but still holding. He laid it across his cloak like a second skin, then draped a smaller one across the shoulders where heat always fled first. He pressed the folds down with his hands, warming the wax. The cloth stiffened, then softened, then clung. Not waterproof, like oilcloth, but water-resistant. Just enough to fight off the evening dew, the creeping mist. His grandmother used to wrap potatoes in waxed cloth to store for winter. He remembered watching her hands' steady breath slow as she sealed each one like it mattered. Because it did. Anything dry in December was gold. These weren't high-tech shells or moisture-wicking synthetics. They were scraps, treated with what the land gave beeswax tallow pine tar. Nothing fancy, nothing fast. But when the wind turned wet, they made the difference between staying warm or staying soaked. Modern jackets zip up and puff out. They promise windproof, waterproof, breathable miracles. But when the grid dies and the stores run dry, what will we wrap ourselves in? Then Toma didn't ask that out loud. He just pressed the final fold against his chest, felt the wax hold, and stepped inside. The fire was out. The heat was gone. But under that waxed cloth, his core stayed dry. And dry. Was halfway to warm. By midnight, the hut had gone quiet again. The fire was down to a faint red glow. Toma could hear the wind brushing the door, the kind of sound that reminded him how thin the walls really were. The temperature had dropped. Fast. He'd already packed the ash, heated the bench, pulled every cloth he had across the floor, and still, the cold crept back in. Slow. Relentless. Like it always did. He looked over at the goat in the corner, curled quiet, half asleep in a bed of hay. She'd been with him since summer. Young, skittish, but smart. That night, he didn't hesitate. He lay down beside her, slow, at first letting his weight settle against the straw, then pulled the blanket over them both. Her body was warm, dense, constant, not like fire hot then gone, more like earth, reliable, solid. The way she breathed, it filled the space around him. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the shivering stopped. The cold stayed outside the cocoon they had made. He remembered hearing stories old men long gone talking about huddling with sheep during storms. He'd always thought they were exaggerating, until now. Now he knew this was no myth. It was memory passed down because it worked. Today we have heated blankets, foam insulation, electric pads, but all of it runs on wires and batteries and plans. And when those fail, sometimes the warmest thing left is what's alive, what breathes beside you. This wasn't comfort. It wasn't cozy. It was survival, messy, instinctive, humble. And as he lay there, the goat's flank rising and falling against his side, Toma realized something simple. You don't beat winter by standing apart from it. You survive by yielding, by getting low, getting close, and letting the world hold you. The last hours before dawn were always the hardest. That was when the heat faded, when even the goat curled tighter, and when frost began creeping across the floor like spilled milk freezing in place. Toma had stopped relying on fire by this hour, too risky to tend half asleep, too wasteful for what little fuel remained. So instead, he reached for his final layer, a cloak thick, heavy, stiff from years of use, lined not with fur, but with wool scraps stitched into double folds. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't soft, but it worked. He'd wrap it tight around his shoulders, then pull the edges under his legs like a cocoon, folded by habit not design. Inside his breath, warm the air. The wool trapped it. The folds held it. And his body, tired as it was, did the rest. This cloak wasn't just clothing. It was architecture. Every seam added by a tired hand, every patch a memory. It had survived snowstorms, rivers, even a chimney fire. It smelled of smoke, animal, and earth. But at that hour, it felt like armor. Modern people sleep under mountains of blankets, climate-controlled rooms, timed heaters, then complain when they wake up cold. But back then, you built your own warmth, layer by layer, thought by thought. A sleeping cloak wasn't bought. It was built over years, over winters, over the slow learning of what the body needs. Toma didn't need five-star comfort. He just needed to survive the night. And as his eyelids drifted and the wind whispered against the wooden walls, he whispered back, wrapped not in luxury, but in memory. By morning, the frost had settled. The fire was gone, but Toma was still breathing, still warm, still alive. Not because of firewood, not because of luck, but because of memory. 7 tricks, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, not written in books, not taught in schools, just lived over and over again. Cold ash, hot stone, sun-warmed walls, straw pits, waxed cloth, wool-lined cloaks, and the simple decision to sleep beside another warm body when the night turned cruel. They didn't have thermostats. They didn't have backups, and when winter took more than it gave, they didn't wait for rescue. They remembered, and they endured. These weren't hacks. They were systems, not for comfort, but for survival. And maybe they still matter, because when the power goes out, when the wood runs low, when help doesn't come, it won't be money that saves you. It'll be knowledge. It'll be skill. It'll be what you practiced before you needed it. No fire, no help, just memory. If this story sparked something in you, subscribe. We've got more forgotten tricks, ancient knowledge, and real systems that still beat the cold, even now.